Hello, my name is Marvin Heemeyer. You have given me license, through your example, to do what I need to do. You picked on the wrong man.
Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. Bob, have you ever been frustrated with the man?
Every freaking day.
You know, when I started researching this case, I'll be honest, one of the things that came to my mind was that time that you got banned from Fazoli's.
I didn't officially get banned, but I think there was an understanding that I was not exactly welcome to return.
For those of you who don't know, Fazoli's is like the McDonald's version of Olive Garden. I mean, it's like fast food Italian. That's fair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No shade on Fazoli's, but it is what it is. And there used to be one back in the day in a place where we lived. And as Bob said, I think there was an understanding that he was not welcome back. What prompted that? Was it like cold breadsticks or what? What did you...
The bottom line is it was something I ordered that had to be... It took longer, so they give you that little plastic thing to go stick on your table, and they'll bring it out to you as soon as it's ready. Well, the entire group ate their entire meals and were ready to go. The breadstick lady had been around 14 times and walked past this little number. They'd brought out other orders and taken them to other tables and walked past my little number tent on the edge of the table. And yeah, I could have said something. But after about the second time someone walked by and hadn't noticed or hadn't, said, hey, let me check on that, it became kind of a point, plus the fact that I was stewing on the issue. And so by the time my group was finished eating completely, I'm not going to sit there and wait for my entree to show up now and start dinner after everybody else is finished. So as we started to leave, my wife at the time suggested, as we're up in the front area close to the counter, that, I go say something. And
well, this is Satan's oldest daughter, right?
Yes.
That's what you call her.
Yes, and I didn't think that was a good idea, which is why I hadn't said anything yet. And when she said that, I said, no, I'm not. And then I went on to very boldly explain at the front area, not really directed at anyone, but just in general, how pointless it would be to reason with morons and how incompetent they were. And it might have been a little more colorful than that, but we ended up going out the door, and she vowed to never, ever, ever set foot in that place with me again, which was okay, because like I said, no words needed to be said. It was clear that I should not come back.
Yeah, and, so just this is like a fraction. Bob's frustration with his lack of lasagna pales in comparison to the case that we are talking about today. We're doing something a little bit different, but...
All right, it was baked spaghetti.
Okay.
And so,
How long does it take to bake some spaghetti? My goodness, it's like 5 minutes.
My first theory on that is like you're an Italian fast food joint, so if you have something on the menu, theoretically you should be able to make it, I don't know, somewhat fast. But I understand, maybe you got some things that take a minute or two longer. No worries, I'll go sit at my table. I just get really, really frustrated with incompetence and poor customer service. And this was just unbelievable that it could persist, that 400 people with a name tag on walked past that number on the edge of my table and never once thought to say, maybe I should check on that. And I don't know what in the heck happened in the kitchen that it just disappeared. But
I think you and our guy, Marv Heemeyer, could be friends. The place we're going today, the town that the center of all this, I don't know if they have a Fazoli's or not, but if I was a betting man, I'm going to guess no. But hey, listen, if you're from the town of Granby, Colorado, and you're listening by chance, let us know. This is the most populous town in Grand County, Colorado, with a whopping 2,079 people. And they live in over 8,000 acres, so maybe you should move there, Bob.
That's nice. Spread out. I like it.
It's about 85 miles northwest of Denver, and U.S. Route 40 goes straight through the town. Well, you remember out west, things were founded a bit later than over here on the East Coast, so the town was founded in 1904, and I thought you would appreciate this. It was named after Granby Heemeyer, who was a prominent lawyer from Denver and a former United States attorney. I know how you feel about lawyers, so I thought I'd include that.
Yeah, yay.
So, Marv, our guy, that we're going to talk about today. Marvin Heemeyer was born October 28th, 1951, not all that far away, in South Dakota. At a young age, he joined the Air Force, and anybody who's served in the military or been around folks who have knows, often that comes with a lot of moving. And so he moved around a bit, and in 1974, he moved to Colorado when he was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base. And during this time, I think that was probably when he first became sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but he liked it. And so he thought, hey, you know what? In the future, when I get a chance, maybe I'm going to move back this way. And in 1989, that's what he did. He moved to Grand Lake, Colorado, which is about 16 miles away from Granby. Now, Marv loved snowmobile trips with friends. I mean, this was something he was really into, and he liked customizing his snowmobile and would do that for others. And when I talk about customizing, I don't mean like stickers and, fancy lights or whatever. I'm talking about this guy. He was a gifted, talented welder and kind of a machinist. And so he would put these bumpers on there so that you could run over small trees and whatever else got in your way while you're snowmobiling. And so he became this go-to guy for outfitting these snowmobiles. And this is in an area of the country where people would travel from all over to be able to go to snowmobile. It was a kind of a destination for this. And so the fact that he really enjoyed it and he's in this place where he can do it, I mean, it was a good fit for him. He really loved living there. And he got a job at a muffler shop. And he was great at this kind of work. Like I said, just a talented guy when it came to welding. Pretty much everything I've seen says, this dude was an exceptional welder. And that's like, it's like art and science comes together. And, if you've ever tried to weld, then you'd understand how hard it is. Have you ever tried to weld, Bob?
Yeah, and my welds come out ugly as hell, and sometimes they hold. Sometimes I just burn holes straight through the metal.
I'd imagine they probably look like what you leave in the toilet after you go to Fazoli's.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. But this guy at muffler shop, there's very few things I like less than dealing with exhaust. That's a terrible... Yeah, underneath it there, every freaking nut and bolt is seized on tighter than a nun's ass. You got shit falling in your eyes, rust and metal flakes. It's no good.
Yeah, I'm trying so hard to keep it straight.
I just don't like exhaust work.
Oh, there was a lot that just happened there. Okay, back to Marv. So he's really good at this muffler work, which, like you just said, is not easy work. Anybody who's done it knows it's dirty, it's difficult, and there's a reason why. You think about it, you go to an auto shop, and you have these auto shops that do everything, and then there are muffler shops that basically specialize in this kind of work.
It's because the mechanics don't want to deal with exhaust.
Exactly. And so he's really, really good at it, and he realizes pretty quickly working there. He's kind of like the best employee. He's knocking it out of the park. He's getting things done quicker than everybody else, better than everybody else. And so it doesn't take long for Marv, who's kind of a little bit of a spendthrift and a smart guy, to say, hey, you know what? Why don't I open my own shop? So fast forward a little bit, and Marv ends up purchasing 2 acres of land in Granby at an auction. And he gets this land for $42,000. I mean, that's a deal, right? Now, at this auction, there's something that's kind of noteworthy that happens, or at least Marv says happens afterward. He says that after the auction ends and he's got this property that only one other person briefly bid against him for, a guy named Cody Dochev comes up to him and basically just goes off on him, loses his mind, right? It says there's this 10-minute tongue lashing. The guy's just giving him what for about the property and all this stuff and whatever. Now, Dochev says this just never happened. They didn't even interact at this auction. He doesn't know why Marv says this happened. It didn't. So one guy says it happened. One guy says it didn't. I wasn't there.
Right.
Anyway, I think it's important to share a few more details about Marv before we really dive into kind of the rest of the story. Marv had no wife. He was never married. He never had kids. And, interestingly, he's living out here in this kind of rural Colorado area, and he's alone, and essentially he's got his work and then his business, beer, and a hot tub. I mean, he spends a lot of time in his hot tub, and he's just sort of hanging out, living what I think you would call the high life, Bob.
I mean, doesn't get any better than that.
Until he went off his rocker, I thought, man, this guy reminds me of my brother, and then I thought, maybe I need to check on you more often. So It doesn't take so long before Marv, who moved to this area, becomes a bit disenchanted with this adopted small town that he's living in. And the first thing that sort of ruffles his feathers is there's this proposal to legalize gambling, and Marv is all about it. He thinks it's such a great idea that he actually sort of becomes the editor of this pro-gambling newspaper that was launched in Grand Lake called the Grand Lake Gazette, and it sort of promoted the financial benefits of introducing legalized gambling in Grand Lake. It only published 2 issues, so it was a short-run newspaper, but it served as sort of the counterbalance for the newspapers that were the traditional ones, the Grand County Sky High News and the Grand Lake Prospector, which both came out and strongly opposed gambling in Grand Lake.
I think the Sky High News serves a different audience now, don't they?
That's what I thought too, but I think it's a different... I think this is Sky, like it's spelled, hyphen H-I, and that's the name of the newspaper.
I see.
So I don't think it's the publication that you're thinking of.
I see. Okay.
In my research, because I initially thought the same thing. I thought, why is I think it's a magazine, actually, is what you're thinking of.
High Times?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew the distinction. I just was assuming that
they were related.
Sky High seems like it would serve the 420 supporters.
And maybe it does, but it seems like they also report on other things out there in this area of Colorado. Now, as things kind of got a little more tense, Marv ended up in some shouting matches with a reporter from Sky High News and the Prospector during some of this heated, quasi-political campaigning that was going on about whether or not to legalize gambling there. But ultimately, the Grand Lake voters turned down gambling by a 4-1 margin. And when that happened, Marv was not happy, but it was just the beginning of things to come.
I'm sure he's not happy. He just realized he's surrounded by idiots, according to him. From his perspective.
That's a fair
something
take.
Looks like this is so obviously a good thing, and 80% of your neighbors vote against it, you're like, they got to be idiots.
Yeah, I think when I want to understand Marv's thinking, I'm just going to ask you how you feel about it. Yeah.
Seems like I can relate. He a diverse guy, too. He an airman, he a muffler maven, welder extraordinaire, and an author. It's a pretty broad set of talents there.
Yeah, this guy is kind of like a Swiss Army knife, for sure. Excuse me, oh my goodness. Bob's got an eye that looks like it got pecked out by a chicken, and I think I've got some kind of allergies going on, so bear with us today. He can't see and I can't talk. It should be a fun episode. All right, so fast forward to Y2K. For those of you who don't know, that's the year 2000. And this sort of becomes the beginning of the catalyst that really is going to cause Marv to lose his mind. So I referenced the Dochefs earlier, Cody Dochef. And the Dochef family owned Mountain Park Concrete. And essentially the business wanted to move the location of its batch plant to this new location that was adjacent, right next to Marv's muffler shop in Western Granby.
Uh-oh.
But this move was going to require a zoning change and extensive involvement by the little town government, public review, all that kind of bureaucratic stuff that comes with something like that. So essentially what ends up happening is the Sky High News, they cover these, I don't even know what you call them, but these like zoning hearings, these public town hearings, all this kind of stuff. And Marv is like totally against this, which you can imagine, right? If you've ever had anything that you didn't want put anywhere near where you live, maybe you can relate to this. But this goes from being what you can imagine to just sort of taking another level before it's all said and done. We'll just put it that way. I don't want to give too much away yet. So Marv ends up, he's writing letters to the editor. He's going to all these hearings. He's pushing the town to sort of take up his fight in terms of pushing back on the plant moving next to him. And so he brings up all these things that are potential problems, right? He kind of launches this public campaign against the concrete plant moving in. And initially, he actually has a good bit of success because people are concerned about the dust and the noise and the increased traffic and all the things that you can imagine would be associated with a concrete plant in this part of town. But The Dochefs, they address these concerns. So they agree with the town to, install additional measures to reduce the dust and reduce the noise, and they sort of give these miniatures of the plant to citizens who are concerned so they can see exactly what it's going to look like. And they kind of agree to do all these different things to try to drum up goodwill and to win people over to agree with it.
Yeah, we're going to be a good neighbor. We've been in this community for 400 years, blah, blah. We'll put up a fan and, we'll put our driveways here and there, and we'll hang mattresses on the outside of the building so you don't hear. Yeah. Heard this story before.
Right, and you raise a good point because you said that about been in the community for 400 years. So the Dochefs are the from here people. They're the family that's been there forever. But remember, Marv served in the Air Force and he moved around a bunch, and then he kind of made this area his adopted home once he, got out.
Hey, Marv's got every right to be there as much as the people that have been there forever.
Hey, I'm not advocating that this is a problem, but what I'm saying is, you've been in a small town before, right? There are the insiders and the outsiders. And Marv very much felt like he was being treated like the outsider because he wasn't from there. He felt like he was not on the home team. And quite frankly, as somebody who's been around small towns, I have no doubt that there was at least some of that going on, because the reality is people who are from a place tend to treat people who are not from there a little bit differently.
And sometimes in cases like these, when you're getting into local, zoning and politics and stuff like that, the from there people will make a real big deal out of the fact that they happen to be from there. Mm-hmm. And somehow their opinion or their vote should mean more. Now, if I'm Marv, what I'm going to say is I chose this place because of what it has to offer, and I have dedicated my time and energy into building a business here that pays taxes and buying land and blah, 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 blah. Whereas you that says you've been from here since you were born, you're only here because this is where your dad banged your mom. But I chose to be here.
Yeah, and that's fair. It makes a lot of sense.
That's my Marv argument, if I was Marv.
Right. And I'm sure he felt that way while he was drinking, Coors Light in his hot tub off his back 40, looking at, 300 acres of nothing. But back to the story, right? So opposition to this concrete or cement plant moving to right next to Marv, it basically dwindled. People were won over by the arguments and by all the different things that the Dochefs were going to do, and the plan was set to move forward again. And essentially at that point, the people who were on this board and the planning commission or whatever they call it out there, there was no reason not to approve it other than Marv was unhappy about it. Well, Marv was not about to give up. In November of 2000, he filed a lawsuit to block the project. He was willing to do whatever it took. Hire lawyers, file lawsuits, do everything he could.
Right, because these sumbitches ain't moving in next to me.
Exactly. Shortly after this, a city clerk wrote a letter to the newspaper basically saying that Marv had a vendetta against the Dochefs, and the clerk referenced Marv's increasingly exorbitant demands during negotiations for the sale of his property to the Dochefs, which is an important point. So the Dochefs were willing to just buy him out. They're like, hey, listen, you don't want to be next to us. We understand. That's fine. We'll just buy you out. So they do some back and forth, and they had sort of verbally come to terms for the sale of Marv's property that would have made him a bunch of money off of it. Because remember, he got it at an auction for $40,000. We fast forwarded about a decade or so. Land values are up. He was looking at a couple $100,000 plus from the Dochefs for his land. So he would have made a significant amount of money. And they were basically, they know if he's this obnoxious before they're there, it's not like he's going to be less obnoxious once they actually put the plant there, right?
Right, but it's not. So one thing is, obviously, it's not about the money for Marv. Like, logically, the reason it sounds like he was going along with it because logically it makes sense, but I think it probably ate at him while he's sitting in his hot tub, that it's the principle, it's not the money. And it does sound like, in this case, the people that are from there, the Dochefs or whatever, it sounds like they are trying to be decent people and do everything right. They could have said, no, we're going to move in next to you and make your life a living hell. But offering to buy him out, okay, we'll resolve this all the way. If you think it's going to be a problem, hey, we'll give you a nice pretty penny and you can do something different.
That's exactly, that's my take on it too. That's a good summation. Now by January 2001, at this point, Marv basically lost most of his allies in opposing the concrete plant. and city officials unanimously approved its construction. By this time, Marv is basically the only person who's against the plan. He tried to appeal the decision of the city, claiming the construction blocked access to his shop, but he was unsuccessful. He also filed complaints with the EPA, and that resulted in the Dochev family having a professional noise analysis done. So, I mean, he's literally thinking of every way that he can just be difficult and stop this from happening. In June of 2001, one of the Dochevs made an offer to Marv to drop the lawsuit, and they would provide him an easement to connect a sewer line to the new concrete plant free of charge. Now, this is relevant because with all this going on, Marv's out there stirring up the bee's nest and whatnot. And basically, through all this, and everybody's looking at everything for the concrete plant and all that stuff, it becomes clear that his property is not connected to the city's, like water sewer hookup or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so when they realize this, they're like, "Oh, hey, Marv, you're out of code. You got to connect to the city's sewer."
Yeah, where's your poo going, dude?
Well, basically, he had this barrel in the ground, and he was using it, and then he would pump it out of that, and he would put it in a trench. It was a whole thing. Like, I'm not kidding. He used a gasoline pump to pump his sewage into an irrigation ditch behind his property. That's what he was doing.
Oh, but we need to have professional noise studies done. I'm pretty sure if you're worried about the environment, that's not such a great idea.
Right, and so you think, like, he's making all this fuss about, and so it kind of draws some attention to this issue. So the town ends up, they're getting on him like, "Hey, you got to do this. You have to do this." So that's where the Dochevs kind of made this offer, like, "Hey, you drop this lawsuit so that we can kind of move forward, and we'll give you an easement to allow you to connect your sewer to the new concrete plant. We'll do it all. You can do it for free." So he just hangs up the phone on him. That's it. That's his response to that offer. So like you said, the Dochevs, they're trying, it seems, from everything I've read and heard about the case, they're trying to, make this work, and he's just not having it. Marv also tried to illegally connect to a neighbor's sewer line, but he got caught, and that was not allowed. At this point in time, then the sewer district started to enforce these requirements, and they start fining Marv, and he ends up getting fined. This is like a couple, 3,000. It's like between, I've seen the numbers different in different places, somewhere between about $2,500 and $3,500 for this sanitation issue and then some other code violations at his business.
All right, he's digging in at this point. He's completely disenfranchised, and he can't even listen to reason because he's had some really good offers to make things all better all the way around, and he's just turning and going, nope, not having any of it. He seems to be blind to reality.
Yeah, and that ties really well in with my next point, which was that he was found in contempt of town code in November of 2001 by the municipal court. And he was required to fix these connection issues before he could inhabit or use the property for business purposes again. And he had to remove that truck barrel that he was using for his sewage before July 2003. Marv agreed to this, but then later that day he rejected it and described the requirements the town was placing on him as, quote, a form of terrorism.
Oh, dear Lord.
Now, after his lawsuit against the town was dismissed in April 2002, Marv blamed that failure on his lawyer and demanded a refund.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, lawyers giving refunds, right?
Yes, that's basically not going to happen. And he was into his lawyer. I mean, lawyers ain't cheap. I forget what the exact amount was, but it was significant. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars because he was incredibly litigious trying to stop this thing. Now, after the zoning decision was as final as it was going to get, Marv made a trip to California, where he ended up buying a Komatsu D355A bulldozer in an auction for $16,000. You have any idea what this kind of bulldozer looks like?
It sounds like a big one.
It's massive. I mean, he had to have it shipped to Granby on a flatbed. It's the kind of thing, people see this thing rolling into town. They're just like, what the heck is that for? That thing's huge.
If you know that old Marv bought it, you're like, what in the world is he doing now? Is he going to dig himself a new sewer hole? Or?
Right. Some specs on this thing for folks like me who don't know anything about bulldozers. So the length with the blade, so that's the front part that you see that dozes stuff. So just under 30 feet. The width over the tracks is just about 10 feet. It's about 12 and a half feet tall. This thing would have weighed about 100,000 pounds. I mean, it's huge. It had 400 horsepower, which sounds unimpressive, but I think for a machine like this, that's actually pretty good. And my understanding is it would hold about 200 gallons of fuel. So this thing, like you said, it is a big one.
You're not parking that in the Walmart parking lot.
I mean, I guess you could.
Well, you're not getting it in a space.
Yeah. You're that guy taking up 6 spaces. So he parks this bulldozer outside of his business for a while with a for sale sign on it. And he even tried to auction it at one point. Basically, people just kind of ignored it, and nobody was interested in buying it. In October 2002, Marv announced that he was closing his muffler shop, and he was going to put almost all of the inventory up for sale. Now, this is where you started to kind of allude to this a little bit, even though you don't know the whole story. Things really start to kind of get a little out of control for old Marv. When the bulldozer failed to sell, remember, he's kind of got the for sale sign on it. He put it up in an auction. Nobody buys it. He sees this as a sign from God that he needs to start his mission.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
To build a sculpture out of the bulldozer?
Well, you could call it that. So he ends up selling his property for $400,000. Remember this? This is the property he bought for $42,000 at the auction.
I'm sure he put some money into it.
Yeah, but I mean, not that much. So he ends up selling it to the trash company in October 2003, and he gets them to lease him back half the building until he finishes some work. Now, within a day of the purchase closing on this property, the new owners completed the water and sewer connections. Just to give you an idea of how simple this would have been.
Right.
This wasn't like some grandiose project, and that's why he fought it. He just fought it on the principle, kind of like you said earlier. So Marv builds this wall to kind of separate the space that he's leasing back from the rest of the building. He changes the locks so that his area is kind of secured. And then, while nobody in Granby was paying any attention to him, he started working on his bulldozer. He made essentially an illegal living quarters inside of his business building there to avoid having to go back to his hot tub home in Grand Lake. And he also felt like he didn't want to waste any time driving back and forth and going home that he could be using to work on his bulldozer. During this period, he got back to his same old habits of dumping his sewage into that same irrigation ditch that he had been caught dumping it into several months earlier.
Oh, wow. And now they're connected up to the good sewer.
Right. Well, yeah, the other part of the building is, but not his little, partitioned off area he's leasing back.
Oh, my God. He was what was he going in a bucket?
I mean, that...
Because you're not going to tell me that the plumbing in half the building was connected to the sewer and half the building was not.
Yeah, I think your guess is accurate that way.
That would have been weird.
So Marv went on to write that, quote, "It's interesting to observe that I was never caught. This was a part-time project over a 1.5-year time period." And he was surprised that there had even been visits to this building where he was working, but even in these visits, somehow nobody noticed what he was working on. They didn't notice this bulldozer that he had spent basically all of his free time that he wasn't sleeping, eating, or dumping his poo working on.
They're probably thinking if he's occupied with that and not doing his shenanigans and driving everybody in town nuts with his lawsuits and comments at these zoning meetings and whatnot, good. If he's busy playing with the bulldozer, great.
Yeah, but he described it, and this kind of just shows a little bit of, I think, the thinking he had at this point. That those folks who came and didn't see it, he said, somehow, this is a quote, somehow their vision was clouded. So I think he believed there were supernatural forces at play here that, essentially he was on a mission from God, and if it wasn't supposed to happen, something would occur that would stop it. But all these things that didn't stop it meant that it was his task to continue with his mission.
Old Marv is becoming less and less a good friend of reality.
Great way to put it. And do you know what Marv started to refer to his bulldozer as?
No.
He called it the MK tank, or Marv's Komatsu tank.
That's oddly boring.
It is. It's pretty lame. I thought maybe you'd say, well, why is he calling it a tank? But I guess you kind of know where this is going. So for the folks who don't know where this is going, and they're probably like, why is he calling it a tank? all that work he'd been doing on this bulldozer was to modify it to essentially turn it into some kind of war-worthy tank apparatus. He covered this thing with armor plating that he created using half-inch steel and concrete sandwiched between sheets of half-inch steel. And he would cover up the cabin, the engine, and parts of the tracks. Essentially, areas that needed to be fortified in order to withstand attacks or to prevent this machine from being stopped by anything. In order to be able to see, once he had fitted it with all this armor, he put video cameras in places, and then they were protected by 3-inch, is it Lexan? How do you say that?
Yeah, I think Lexan.
Plexiglass,
whatever.
Yeah, right. So he used this really, really thick special acrylic plastic that was clear that would cover these cameras so that they would be bulletproof, really. And then you'd say, well, what happens if they get covered with dirt? Well, he thought about that because he put these compressed air nozzles right by them so that he could blow any dust or debris away from where the cameras were behind the Lexan.
Oh my goodness.
He even
Why does he need this thing to be bulletproof?
Well, you just wait. We're going to get there. He even included some onboard fans and an air conditioner to keep him cool while he was inside.
Did he put a hot tub in it?
He did not put a hot tub in it. Okay. There was no room for a hot tub. He did put this kind of like wooden desk thing in there where he had these little mini TV monitors so he could see the cameras. And he also outfitted it with some ports for a 50 caliber rifle, a 308, it's like a semi-automatic like an AR, and a 22 rifle. And these were all fitted with steel plating to, protect essentially it was just enough the barrel could be outside of it and he could move it around a little bit, but there wasn't a lot of room. You couldn't get anything in there.
Bulletproof and guns. All right, I'm getting the idea here. Marv about to go off the reservation, ain't he?
That's a fair way to put it. So that takes us to June 4th, 2004. It's about a quarter after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and old Marv Heemeyer climbed up a ladder and hopped inside his tank, his MK tank, right? And he had this thing set up so that when he got inside of it, he would shut the door that he had made for him to get in.
The hatch?
The hatch, yeah. I mean, really, this is what this is. And he had it designed so that once he shut the hatch, there's no way to open it.
What?
So even he couldn't open it.
You're either going to blow me right off the streets, I'm going to have a heart attack and die because I'm all pumped up. The machine's going to break. Or maybe it'll go all day and I'll run out of fuel. I don't know. I got a lot of fuel in that thing, let me tell you.
So he had himself, a handful of, I think, a couple 6-packs of Slim Fast in there. But he gets in this thing full knowing that if, he goes to start it and it doesn't start for some reason, he's just going to be stuck in there, and this is his grave inside this building that, his muffler shop used to be in.
That is no good at all. That is no good at all because, in my experience, when I get in there, I'm either going to A, forget something, or B, it ain't going to start. I'm going to have to go fiddle with something. I mean, what if he gets in there and he's like, shit, forgot my keys?
Right? Yeah. It would be bad. But he got inside this cockpit that he had made, and he set his sights on everything and everyone that ever made him angry in the town of Granby.
Uh-oh. Just bulldozing them.
So he fired this thing up, and fortunately for him, I guess, it started right away, no issues. And he just drove it straight out his shop, took the wall down, didn't even, just boop, right through. And where do you think the first place he went was?
Well, the concrete plant?
Bingo. So right next door is the concrete plant, and he went through, and he just plowed through the concrete plant, owned by that Dochev family. But I mean, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a weekday, and so there are people working there. Several employees tried to stop the bulldozer. They actually, and I thought this was, and listening to some interviews and watching some coverage of what took place. These guys are really smart. They knew that if they could stop the tracks of this bulldozer, that essentially they could keep it from moving, and that would negate the most of what the damage this thing was doing. So they tried, they had like these long steel rods or whatever. Basically anything they had on hand, they were trying to shove it in the tracks, but it had no effect. I mean, this thing is massive, and he had armored it in a way that it really didn't have any weak points that anybody could take advantage of. Now, Cody Dochev, he was there at the concrete plant, and initially he thought somebody was just remote control controlling this dozer. He didn't think anybody was actually inside of it. So he got a pistol from a coworker and he fired at it. He tried to climb on top of it, but couldn't really do anything. And then he even got his own front end loader and was trying to kind of like, just lift up the side or
battle bots.
Right, literally. But again, just no success because this dozer is freaking huge. Now, it's around this time they start to realize this thing isn't just a remote-controlled dozer that's, just going to drive around and destroy stuff. Because
it's about that time that Cody said, shit, I should have bought this damn thing when he parked it out front with the for sale sign on it.
Like, that's what this was for. Exactly. Well, Marv starts firing multiple rounds at Cody's loader, and that's when Cody realizes, oh, this is over my pay grade. And
there's somebody in here. This has gotten,
Yeah, so a deputy from the sheriff's office shows up, and then you have Colorado State Police. They show up, and they end up getting fired at by Marv. And you can imagine the scene, right? The 911 calls start piling in. Things are going crazy. Everybody's like, there's a bulldozer tank thing, and there's shots being fired. The concrete plant's, collapsing because he's tearing it apart with his bulldozer.
And every cop's going, I missed one damn day in the academy. It must have been the day they covered this.
Yeah, I can't imagine, what do you do with that, right? So at one point, you have a handful of these police officers. They sort of set up behind like a concrete K-rail, and they're sort of at this defensive, offensive type position where they're behind this K-rail, but they're able to kind of keep an eye on this thing. They're shooting at it, trying to find a vulnerability. They're not getting anywhere. And so Marv...
You need military to deal with this.
We'll get to that part of the story.
I'm just saying
You realize that quickly. It took them a little while.
Folks experienced in warfare might have better understanding of how do we defeat this because, the military is used to either A, encountering weapons like this, mobile units that they've never seen before, or they already have the intelligence of this kind of dumb shit is out there, and here's what we do if we encounter it. Just my thoughts.
Yeah.
I'd be like... calling up, I know there's some military bases there in Colorado. I'd be dialing up. Hey, you help us out with this here?
Right. No, exactly. So these officers, they take up this position. They're kind of behind this concrete K-rail. They're sort of shooting and just taking stock of what's happening. Well, Marv, he sees these guys. He just bulldozes straight at them. And according to eyewitness accounts, they basically were able to run out of the way seconds before he just destroys this K-rail and would have run them over, essentially. So after the concrete plant, Marv heads down the main street in town. I think it's pronounced Agate Avenue, which is, I believe, 40 that runs through that. And this is like US 40 that runs through the whole country. And he heads south toward town. And this thing, it's huge and it's terrifying and all that, but it doesn't go very fast. I don't know if you have much experience with bulldozers. They're not exactly made for, flying down the highway. I think the top speed listed on this thing without all the stuff Marv did to it is like 7 miles an hour. With all this armor and everything he's added to it, it can't go quite that fast. So
that's the only saving grace here is that if you can get the word out, people can get out of the way.
Right. So it's going about 5 miles an hour down Main Street. Now, officers who had been at the plant, they asked dispatch to do a reverse 911 call to be made to all the residents in order to initiate evacuations. You want to speak to what a reverse 911 call is?
Well, I assume that's when you...
Oh, I just figured you knew.
No, never had any experience with that.
Oh.
Well, not when you're talking about it all... I guess they got some kind of a notification...
Yeah, so essentially they can do, instead of, you calling 911, 911 calls out to all these residents and they can send like a recording, a message or whatever, shelter in place or evacuate or whatever.
I do not believe that particular technology is available in every jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that at all. I just know that's what happened in this particular case.
It didn't exist in any jurisdiction that I worked in. Oh. Everyone had different notification systems, but none like that.
Oh, that's a shame. So... as this thing's making its way downtown, this guy named Glenn Trainer, he's an undersheriff there, climbed on top of it, which that's good for him. I mean, that takes, because you don't know what this guy, I mean, you got this armored bulldozer, and he's clearly got the capability. He's fired at officers. He's tried to take some out behind his K-rail. But so this guy, he does what cops do, and he just goes at the dangerous thing. So he gets on top of it. And he's trying to figure out a way, like, is there some chink in the armor? Is there some place where I can figure out a way to stop this thing or stop this guy? So he fires some shots here and there, no luck. He ends up getting one of his colleagues to toss him up some flashbangs, and he drops a flashbang grenade down the bulldozer's exhaust pipe, and it has zero effect. It does nothing.
Nice.
So at this point, he's sort of realizing, okay, there's nothing I can do up here. I'm just riding along. I should probably not be up here. And so he ends up getting off whenever... with the debris and all the stuff from the bulldozer doing what it's doing, he needs to get out of there for his own safety.
Right, because he going to go through a building or something, and I'm going to be the hood ornament that gets knocked off first. But A for effort, dude. I mean, climbing up on there, looking for a hatch, a way to introduce something into the cabin and eliminate the threat. A for effort, my man.
You care to take a guess where Marv went next?
City Hall?
Bingo! He went straight to Granby Town Hall. Now... this is a part of the story that just hold on to your chair, right? City Hall also housed the public library, and it had been hosting a story hour for children in the library when this all started.
Oh, come on.
Thankfully, this reverse 911 call and all the measures that have been taken to get everybody out and understanding, law enforcement, once they had this, oh, this is Marv, it was like, okay, they slowly and quickly pieced together. He's not just randomly taking stuff out. He's going after people and places that he has a beef with. And so they were thankfully able to get the occupants of Town Hall and the library evacuated. But this happened just moments before Marv actually made it to the building. So he gets there about an hour after this all starts, but it just took them a while to kind of figure out, like, okay, what's he up to? And why is he doing this? And then once they did, thankfully they were able to get him out in time. Next, Marv went to Liberty Savings Bank, and he just took out a corner, and it was this office where a woman who was part of the zoning board worked. So every single one of these places he went had something to do with somebody who had pissed him off at some point.
Just the corner where this lady worked, that's detailed.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing. And police basically, they didn't really have any way to stop it. They were trying to figure it out. They couldn't figure it out, but they didn't give up. So what ends up happening is it kind of like the OJ chase. They're just sort of jogging alongside this thing and staying with it as they're trying to think and figure out what to do and telling people, get out, leave, go, evacuate, whatever. And he went down through town then. He took out a bunch of street fixtures. He took out trees and traffic lights. And then he went to offices of the local newspaper. He also, there was a family that was sort of like, you mentioned, one of those families been around for 400 years, the Thompson family. I think their dad had been like the mayor and was the mayor at the time when all this sort of started initially. He went for their workplace and their home was actually where their mom lived. Their dad was deceased at this point, but their mom was there, and she was actually like, I think she had just woken up from a nap or something, and so her boys called and said, Mom, you got to get out of there. Marv is on the rampage, right. Which, I mean, could you imagine just getting that phone call like, hey, Marv's got his bulldozer. He's coming for you.
Right. No, not a good day. But I imagine if you knew this fella and what he'd been through, hearing Marv's on the rampage with the bulldozer, would be a little frightening. So
thankfully, they're able to get her out of her home in time, but he goes and just demolishes it. The entire house just levels it. It's gone. I mean, he just destroys everything. Police, they're trying to think, like, how do we stop this thing? How do we immobilize it? They call, it's like the Department of Highways or whatever, and they ask him to bring one of those scraper trucks. The big, like, long, it's got the scraper thing on the bottom, and, I mean, they're massive. They're not, like, stocky like a bulldozer, but they're big vehicles.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Where are they going with this?
So they ask them to bring one of the scrapers up, and they bring it up, and they try to like block the roadway to sort of pin the bulldozer in. Mm-hmm. And there's footage of this from a helicopter. And this bulldozer goes through this thing like a bowling ball through a bowling pin. I mean, it's not even there.
I hope they parked it and got out.
I don't think so, because it sort of tried to fight, you know what I mean? Like the guy in the scraper, he's sort of trying to like maneuver it and it just, it didn't do anything.
Yeah, again, I'd prefer a real tank in this situation.
I'm with you.
With that big old cannon on the front.
Well, next, Marv went to a propane storage yard.
Ooh, this could get Interesting.
Right. And remember, he's got these guns in his tank. So he starts firing off shots. And it appears that he's trying to hit the propane tanks, which, my understanding, there's roughly like 30,000 gallons of propane in some of these tanks or in this tank yard. And so police are, at this point, once they realize as he's heading there, this is where he's going. I mean, they're like obviously very concerned. They try to evacuate residents within 1,000 yards of the site. They're trying to get everybody out of there. There was a senior folks, like an old folks home nearby. And so
convenient.
It's chaos at this point. So he fires at these, but it turns out that the way that his gun's positioned and where he needs to shoot, the angle, the trajectory that he needs to get, the blade on his bulldozer was actually blocking the shots. So he was unable to really get any of those. I think he may have hit one, like with one of his smaller guns, but wasn't able to do any damage with it.
Wow.
But then he fires on some local power transformers, hoping maybe that'll ignite the tanks. But again, it's not happening. And clearly, if these tanks had been blown up, that would have been a whole other, that would have been really bad. So they bring in another scraper. Again, no luck. I mean, they're trying, but I'm with you. I'm like, at what point do you, like, you gotta up your game a little bit. And that's really what happened. So the state police kind of figured out, we don't have options. We can't deal with this. They tried firing rounds at it. They tried the flashbang. They tried all this stuff. No luck. The governor gets contacted, and he was apparently considering authorizing the National Guard to just send in like an Apache with a Hellfire missile, or to have like a team come in with some Javelin anti-tank missiles to destroy the bulldozer.
See, I told you they have the tools and the know-how to deal with something like this.
You're right. Now, what's interesting about this story is some people on the governor's staff claim that there was never any consideration of this course of action, but members of the state police say that that's not true, that the governor did consider authorizing the attack, but ultimately decided against it due to the potential collateral damage of a missile strike in the heart of Granby.
There's a whole bunch of semantics going on there. First of all, the governor isn't the one sitting there saying, gee, do I use an Apache with a Hellfire, or do I use a Javelin missile? He's calling whoever's in charge of the National Guard and having a conversation with probably 6 other people going, all right, what the hell do we do with this? Well, I mean, we can shoot it from a helicopter, but this cause it, well, we can go with the anti-tank missiles, but, you know, you got a lot of people in that town, you can have a lot of collateral damage. And somebody else going, well, there's no other way to stop him. And somebody going, well, what if we just knock it over? Can we get something big enough to just put it on its side so we can't, you know, all these considerations are, they're evaluating the options like normal people. It's not like the governor's sitting there picking between the red and the blue and the black button and going, gee, am I going to send this, or this?
I figured it's probably, you know, a couple of military guys and like 10 lawyers.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about the lawyers, but I'm sure there were people with specialties on that line, and, you know, whoever's in charge of the National Guard in consultation with the governor. And a smart governor would be asking, all right, if we do this, what are the consequences?
Yeah. Next, Marv turned his attention to this place called Gamble's Store. That's just the name of it. And he targeted it because of the owner's involvement in the hearings about the cement plant. But what Marv didn't know was that there was a small basement on the property.
Uh-oh.
And so as he started tearing up Gamble's store, one of his treads got stuck in the basement.
There, see? Tip him over.
And there had already been some damage to the radiator, and the engine was leaking before this happened. So in the video, you could see that there was looked like a coolant and maybe even hydraulic fluid. It was leaking fluids. There was a big puff of smoke when that first happened, where you could tell the engine was starting to have some issues. And so I think maybe he was low power, and then he ends up dropping this tread there. And you see him, he tries to kind of rock it back and forth and get out of there, but ultimately he's unable to free himself. He's stuck. Then, about a minute or so later, after this thing stops moving, realizing that any attempt to try to free it from this basement that it's been stuck in would be futile, a SWAT team member who was nearby and had been around the machine reported hearing a single gunshot from inside the cab. Later on, it would be determined that Marv had shot himself in the head with a .357 handgun that he had taken with him with his Slim Fast.
Wow.
Police, fearing that maybe this isn't the end, even if he's, even if he has taken his life.
They're booby trapped.
Bingo.
Secondary devices.
So they use explosives, sort of twofold, right? They want to see if they can get rid of any booby traps, make sure there's no issue there, but also, like, maybe we can blow a hole in this thing so that we can see inside or get this guy out or make sure he's dead or whatever. So they do a first explosion on the side with the steel plates and nothing. Like, I mean, it rocks the tank, but it is completely, essentially unaffected.
Wow. Well, he's a good welder.
They do a second and a third explosion and nothing. They still have not been able to penetrate the armor that he put on there, which again, like I said, he used like half-inch steel, and you imagine like an ice cream sandwich, right? He's got concrete, he's got half-inch steel concrete, and then more half-inch steel sort of sandwiched together that way. So it's a formidable armor that he's put on this thing. So eventually they end up using an oxyacetylene cutting torch to cut access to get inside. And that's when they find that he had enough food and water to last him a week in there. They were ultimately able to retrieve Marv's body around 2 a.m. on June 5th, the next day. The whole thing lasted 2 hours and 7 minutes. He damaged 13 buildings, 11 of which had been occupied until just moments before he destroyed them. He targeted Town Hall, the Sky High newspaper office, that Gamble's General Store, Maple Street Builders, Mountain Parks Electric Co., Liberty Savings Bank, Copycat Graphics, the wall of his former business, the muffler shop, the home of the former mayor where the 82-year-old widow was staying, that was the Thompsons, and then the hardware store owned by another man that Marv named in a lawsuit, as well as a few others. It knocked out natural gas service to the town and obviously damaged the concrete plant. He destroyed part of a utility service center. As part of the rampage, Marv destroyed several trees, traffic lights, and all these things that he had issues with. Essentially, anybody and anything that had ever upset him, that's what he went after. The damage was estimated at $7 million, $2 million of which was just the concrete plant, which was underinsured and only received a payout of $700,000.
Ouch.
Now, in the aftermath of this, you have people on sort of two sides. Some say that, they kind of understood where Marv was coming from and thought he was a good guy because they had good memories of good times with him, and sort of said that he made it a point not to hurt anybody during this rampage because even though this has sort of become known as a Killdozer, nobody died during this incident except for Marv.
Right.
But, that's on the one side where people say, oh, he went out of his way not to hurt anybody. But on the flip side, it seems to me that the reality is during this whole incident, had it not been for some quick thinking and evacuation tactics, the reverse 911 thing, and officers really, and family members, people in the community working together to notify folks that, hey, this is going on and you need to get the heck out of there. It's hard for me to imagine that had some of those people been in the library or if 82-year-old Mama Thompson had been in her house and had not been told to get out or had just taken a little while longer to do it, it's hard to believe that they wouldn't have died or at least been severely injured when a bulldozer destroyed these properties.
Yeah, I was wondering as you were describing some of this, like I was trying to think, what is Marv thinking? Is he intentionally trying to get people, or is he thinking, I'm moving at a snail's pace here, it's middle of the afternoon, everybody's seeing this, they'll be out of the way? Or is he sort of, don't care either way, I'm going to make a mess, if they're meant to get out of the way, they'll get out of the way, and if not, they won't.
Honestly,
I'll do my mission and let the good Lord sort it out.
That's kind of how I take it. I don't think... I think they kind of give him too much credit on either side, because I think it's more of that. I think it's like, when it's time to go, it's time to go, and whatever happens, happens. And like you said, this is my calling. I'm putting that in air quotes. This is my mission in air quotes. And, chips fall where they do.
Yeah, he lost touch with reality a while back, and he's gone into straight up crazy at this point. So who knows?
Yeah, and I think evidence of this is seen whenever, after this, obviously investigators, they kind of go and start to try to piece together what was motivating him and why exactly. Obviously they have a good idea of generally why he's upset, but they want to know, is there more to this? And so they find a handwritten list of 107 people that were essentially targets that he believed had wronged him. And the Dochev family was at the top of the list, and he had written their names as Douche F.
Oof.
The list also included buildings and companies, politicians, judges, newspaper editors, and basically anybody who had disagreed with him in past disputes.
I don't think I know 107 people.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, he had even included the Catholic Church, basically because of their opposition to his attempts to legalize gambling. And
oh, nothing about diddling choir boys, but you oppose gambling. That's a problem.
right, that's a fair point. Prior to this rampage, he had also kind of, if you just picture a crazy person, that's how I picture it in my mind, he had written this list of complaints onto an old for sale sign, as well as scrap paper. Everything from the Dochev's unwillingness to pay even more money that he had requested for his property. Because remember, he kept going back and raising the price.
Right.
Because like you said, at the end of the day, it really wasn't about money. It was the principle of it all.
Yeah, I think he might have been initially okay with it, but he went and sat in his hot tub and thought about it a little bit more and thought to himself, no, they're taking from me, blah, blah, blah. And he goes back at him and they're like, all right, we'll give you another, whatever, 10,000. And he's like, he logically sees that makes sense, but logic went out the window long about the time he started welding steel and concrete together to armor that tank.
He got in that hot tub and he stewed and brewed and then came unglued is what happened. There was some other stuff he had written. He had claimed, quote, I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things, which just sounds like the kind of stuff anybody who's lost their mind would say. He also recorded audio tapes, which we'll include a link to those in the show notes if you want to listen. And we got a little clip there at the beginning so you could hear what he sounds like. And these explain a lot of the motivations for his attack. There's 2 separate recordings on each side for a total of 6 recordings. And he mailed these tapes to his brother in South Dakota shortly before he hopped in the Dozer. Marv's brother had turned the tapes over to the FBI, who sent him to Grand County Sheriff's Department. Roughly about 2.5 hours long. And these recordings came from... It started in April of 2004, and then he finished them up at about the end of May, just about 2 weeks before the rampage. And you can hear listening to these, to his voice, to the way he sounds, and to the things that he's saying, as Bob has said a couple times now, that he just became pretty disassociated with reality. He had reached a point of no return where things that are not okay and don't make sense had become normal and necessary in his mind. And I think, one of the things that I haven't read about in this case or heard much about, though, is the danger of just being so isolated. Old Marv was out there on his own in his hot tub with his beer, left to nothing but his own devices. And he had friends and stuff, don't get me wrong, but in this instance, with what he was doing, he really was just kind of a man on an island with this mission, in air quotes. And we see what happened with that. I mean, good grief, if he had just had somebody who could have said, hey, Marv, I think maybe you need to back it off a little bit. I don't know that he would have listened, but, man, you really see what happens when we kind of go down the rabbit hole too far on our own, I think.
Who knows? Maybe there were people that made little attempts to... But his issue, it sounds like, is that he sort of put it all together on his own, and I don't know that anybody could have helped him there, but on all the littler issues, obviously he wasn't taking advice from people who... he had people on his side in the beginning at some of these things, but he just would not listen to reason or be reasonable, and lost everybody that supported him along the way because he was so convinced that whatever he was thinking was the way it was. So what did they do with the bulldozer?
That's a great question. So the town didn't want the bulldozer to become this sort of tourist attraction monstrosity monument. So they immediately had it taken off and destroyed. So whenever it was destroyed, it had to be basically this thing was built the way that it was. It was not an easy thing. It took quite some time for them to dismantle it. And they just cut it up into pieces and completely got rid of it so that nobody could have a part of it or could point to it or turn it into a shrine or a monument to Marv.
Okay, but perfectly good bulldozer.
I don't disagree. And there were people in the town who felt like, hey, this is a great opportunity for some tourist dollars. I don't know how I feel about that, but, there's weirder things out there.
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that he didn't kill anybody with it, it's less morbid, but I'm just thinking, well, I guess, he tried to sell it, nobody wanted to buy it, so maybe really nobody wanted it.
I mean, it's kind of fitting that that's the end it got. And the irony of this case being sort of, referred to frequently as the Killdozer case, when the only person who died is the guy who made it. I don't know, man. I'm not much of a poet, but there's some irony there.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site and join us for the next episode.